In 1969, something extraordinary happened beneath the cold, storm-ridden waters of the North Sea. Just over 200 miles off the British coastline, drilling equipment struck oil, and not just any oil. What engineers and geologists had discovered was the Ekofisk oil field, one of the largest offshore oil reserves ever found at the time. This was not a modest resource. This was a once-in-a-century discovery, the kind that rewrites national destinies. For Britain, this should have been the moment everything changed. For the first time since the decline of its empire, the United Kingdom had stumbled upon a natural resource capable of restoring long-term prosperity. Oil meant energy independence, it meant revenue, it meant leverage, it meant security. It meant the chance to build a financial foundation that could support generations. And Britain was not alone. Across the North Sea, Norway had made the same discovery. Both nations began drilling at roughly the same time. Both extracted enormous quantities. Both earned vast sums of money. But only one of them treated that oil as a gift meant for the future. The other treated it like a temporary fix. Britain before the oil, a nation in decline. To understand why Britain made such catastrophic decisions, you have to understand the psychological state of the country in the late 1960s and 1970s. This was not a confident nation. This was not a patient nation. This was a country deeply unsure of itself. The United Kingdom had gone from being the world's dominant economic and military power to a struggling post-industrial state in less than a generation. Manufacturing collapsing, productivity lagged behind Europe and the United States, inflation surged, trade unions brought entire industries to a standstill. The government lurched from crisis to crisis. By the mid-1970s, Britain faced a humiliation few thought possible. It had to ask the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. The former financial center of the world was broke. So when oil began flowing from the North Sea, it wasn't viewed as an opportunity for generational planning. It was viewed as a lifeline. The temptation of easy money. By the late 1970s, Britain was extracting around 100 million barrels of oil per year, rising rapidly as infrastructure expanded. By the end of the decade, roughly 600 million barrels had been extracted, generating billions in revenue at exactly the moment the government needed cash. That money poured directly into the state. It funded welfare, it stabilized pensions, it supported the NHS, it paid public sector wages, it softened the blow of industrial decline. Oil revenue became a fiscal painkiller, relieving symptoms without curing the disease. And politically, it worked. There was no immediate collapse, no public revolt, no urgent demand for reform. Oil money bought Britain time. But time, as it turned out, was squandered. Norway's long view. Norway faced many of the same economic pressures, but it made one crucial decision early on. Oil wealth would not be treated as income, it would be treated as capital. From the very beginning, Norway insisted on state ownership, high taxation, and strict democratic oversight. Oil companies operating in Norwegian waters paid taxes of up to 78% on profits. The state retained control. Politicians were constrained. Institutions were built to outlast election cycles. Most importantly, Norway accepted the hard truth: oil would not last forever. So instead of spending the money, Norway invested it. Oil revenues were placed into what would eventually become the Government Pension Fund Global, a sovereign wealth fund designed to grow slowly, safely, and independently of short-term political pressures. This fund did not exist to win elections. It existed to protect the future. Britain chooses a different path. Britain, by contrast, never created such institutions. Oil revenue flowed straight into government budgets. There were no hard rules preventing politicians from spending it. There was no firewall between oil money and electoral politics. Then came the 1980s. Margaret Thatcher entered office with a radically different vision for Britain. She believed the state was too big, too inefficient, and too intrusive. Privatization became the cornerstone of her economic revolution. In principle, privatization can work. In practice, Britain applied it recklessly. National assets, telecoms, utilities, transport, and crucially oil were sold off at historically low valuations. The government warned itself internally that selling oil assets would generate a short-term gain but destroy long-term revenue streams. Those warnings were ignored. British oil interests were sold piece by piece. By the mid-1980s, the state no longer controlled its most valuable natural resource. Eventually, British oil assets were absorbed into BP, a private multinational corporation whose profits would no longer flow directly to British citizens. The oil kept flowing, the money did not. The Great Misallocation. Between the 1980s and 1990s, Britain raised roughly £67 billion from privatization. This was an enormous sum. Used wisely, it could have modernized infrastructure, strengthened education, invested in innovation, and created a financial buffer for future crises. Instead, much of it was used to fund tax cuts, particularly for higher earners. This was justified under the promise of trickle-down economics, the belief that wealth created at the top would eventually benefit everyone. But the evidence never supported this claim. Investment did not surge, productivity growth remained weak, manufacturing continued to decline, inequality exploded. Britain traded future stability for short-term political popularity. The cost of lost time. By the time oil production peaked, Britain had nothing to show for it institutionally. No wealth fund, no permanent income stream, no financial shield. Economists estimate that Britain forfeited hundreds of billions of dollars in potential revenue by not following Norway's model. Some estimates suggest a British sovereign wealth fund could have exceeded £850 billion today, enough to fundamentally change the country's financial position. That fund could have softened the 2008 financial crisis. It could have stabilized public services. It could have financed a green energy transition. It could have reduced inequality. Instead, Britain entered the 21st century exposed. Dutch disease and regional collapse. Oil didn't just fail to save Britain, it actively accelerated some of its problems. The inflow of oil revenue strengthened the pound, making British exports less competitive. Manufacturing collapsed faster. Industrial regions were hollowed out. Entire communities were left behind. Norway avoided this by controlling production and investing abroad. Britain did not. London boomed. The rest of the country stagnated. The present-day consequences. Today, Britain lives with the consequences of those choices. Government debt exceeds £2 trillion. Real wages have barely grown since 2008. Public services are stretched beyond capacity. Infrastructure is aging. Young people face lower living standards than their parents. To fill the gap, governments raise taxes, cut benefits, and impose austerity, policies that would have been unnecessary had Britain retained long-term oil income. Norway, meanwhile, earns billions every year simply by existing. The final tragedy. The tragedy is not that Britain had oil and lost it. The tragedy is that Britain had oil and knew exactly what to do with it, and still chose not to. It chose speed over patience, politics over planning, consumption over investment. History will not remember Britain's oil era as a triumph. It will remember it as the greatest missed opportunity in modern economic history. If you want long-form, brutally honest financial documentaries that explain how nations rise, fall, and quietly destroy their own futures, then subscribe, like the video, share it, subscribe, because the biggest economic disasters aren't accidents, they're choices.